Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and firstly, I'd like to say my photo of the day is a dedication to Her Majesty the Queen, who passed and died last night, and to say how much I miss her. She's been the Queen for the whole of my life, and this really feels like a moment in history. And now on.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And I have to say, my grandmother had a picture of the Queen in her kitchen all of my life, all of her life and my life growing up as well. And being in Canada, it largely impacts, I think, Canadian society as well.
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot that will be said, but also those of us who had the privilege of seeing her, meeting her, know what our own memories are. And for me, I think that's the most positive thing. Now, this past week is when we talk about the things that we've been doing to generally advocate for Masters Rowing. And for myself, I have been endlessly reshuffling regatta entries because we have people ill and injured and this and that and the other, and some extremely loyal and lovely and willing people to step into shoes of others who cannot be at the regatta. And I'm really looking forward to it, actually. It's been a long time coming, because this time last year, Auckland, the province that I live in, had a lockdown and we couldn't go to the national championships, and the rest of the country did. What have you been up to?
Well, our club got a brand new dock, which was kind of exciting. And, being, as those people who put endless volunteer hours into helping grow clubs, it's quite a big step for our club. And, we were very fortunate to get a grant from a local foundation that supports a lot of community projects. And they installed a beautiful dock. So we're very excited about that. And, it's interesting how another piece of infrastructure really starts to change the culture of the club. And our club is a very young club, as people know, as we've talked about. And, bringing a dock into the scenario, it doesn't sound like a big thing at first, but, you start to feel like, oh, okay, well, now we have to learn skills related to this, right? We have to learn etiquette. We have to learn how to get in and out from a dock, which is very different from a wet launch. What's the traffic pattern? What's the protocol? And these are, it's kind of fun teaching people about this, because it's a whole different element for those people who didn't, for example, row in university or row in a scholastic program. It's something new coming in as a master's into a rowing club when you haven't had this kind of formal training in the etiquette and the culture of rowing and how things are done. And, this has been kind of a really fun step to bring people to the next level of their sculling, even if it is going in and out of a dock. So it's kind of, it's been quite fun.
Well, that's a really congratulations, because I'm sure there is an enormous amount of hard work that goes in before something like that physically appears.
Absolutely. So anyway, so that's been exciting for us. And, we want to keep the momentum going and, keep the club building.
And I noticed something when we were down at Caroe last weekend. We had a warm-up regatta, and they have changed the non-slip matting on the launch pontoon. So the way they work is that there is a sliding ramp that comes down from the edge of the lake, and then the pontoon rests on the water. Because it's a hydro dam, the water level varies. And we, thanks to Kevin at our club, purchased this non-slip matting a couple of years ago, and it's brilliant. And it has holes in it, so the water drains through, but it has enough texture to grip, but not so much that it's super rough. And they've clearly heard about it as well, I hope, from us. If anyone's interested, it's called AKO Plus, AKO Plus, and the supplier, the manufacturer, is a German company called Koikman, KOICKMANN.de, and they often supply it for things like ski lodges, places where there is, the weather affects where you're walking and you need to ensure that you won't slip over. It's extremely good, and I recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, well, that can be a big issue if clubs have wooden, especially if you have a wooden dock and there's dew, or the dock is wet, or there's a little bit of an angle. It can be quite easy to slip on docks, which it's not fun.
Or in our case, covered in goose and swan poo.
That's true. That is definitely true. So, all of these obstacles we have to deal with are part of rowing, right? So
now our sponsor this week is a brand new course, which we are delighted to announce today. It is the Sculling Intensive course. It's 1 week of tuition led by me, Rebecca Caroe. The entire course is virtual, and the way it works through the whole week is each evening, US time, we'll be having Zoom meetings where we will run through the lesson plan for the following day, which you will download, print, and take in the boat with you. And then that evening, we will meet again and download and talk and understand and interpret what you have learned. The curriculum runs through the full rowing stroke cycle. So this is a technique course, and it's designed for people who want more confidence in a single scull. It's not suitable for complete beginners. You really do need to be able to get into a boat on your own and row maybe 2,000 meters in a single. If you can do that, then this course is suitable for you. You don't have to be able to, for example, row square blades or get your blades off the water. No, this is fine. It's a beginner through intermediate sculling course. If you watch your inbox tomorrow, Saturday, the 10th of September, 2 days time, US, you will receive an email if you are on our newsletter subscription list, and all the details will be in there. We are opening this first to people who are on our newsletter list before we publicize the course more widely, because spaces are limited, and we would like to actually favor the people who are already listening to Faster Masters, already receiving our newsletter. I will, however, advertise it more broadly in the middle of next week. The dates are during October, so there's plenty of time to book. And I very much look forward to meeting all of these intrepid beginner through intermediate scullers when we start the Sculling Intensive course. Now, this week, we have a very special guest. It's important for so many rowers that we actually have coxswains who can look after us when we are in our coxed big boats. And I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast, Katy Smith. Hi, Katy.
Hi, it's very nice to meet everybody, and I'm glad to be here.
Now, tell everyone a little bit about you and your background in rowing.
So I actually started rowing at the Westside Rowing Club in Buffalo, New York. I started in a 7th grade summer program, and I was a little too short to be able to keep up with the taller kids. So they thought I was the perfect size to sit in the coxswain seat, and so that I started there. I coxed all through high school at the Westside Rowing Club, and I coxed in college. I actually went to Edinburgh University in Pennsylvania, but I coxed for Mercyhurst for their alumni program.
Uh-huh.
And after that, I graduated, moved back to Buffalo, went to Buffalo Scholastic Rowing Association, stayed there for a while, and then relocated to North Carolina with my husband and my 2 dogs to get a job down here. And I've landed with the Asheville Rowing Club, and I'm now one of the main coxswains there. There's only 3 of us right now. So we're in a good recruiting phase, and just, really glad to be a part of this sport for so long. It's such an important part of my existence.
Well,
That is fantastic.
Katie will be surprised to know that I was on the first women's crew at Westside Rowing Club in 1977.
Wow.
So Westside Rowing Club in Buffalo is where I started rowing. And 1977 was the first year that they had girls crew. So I rowed all through high school for Westside as well.
That's awesome. Westside was where I started, and they're near and dear to my heart. So
absolutely. A lot of good coaches come out of Westside, by the way. Tom Terhar from the U.S. Women, Buffalo Westside guy. So
it's great to have pedigree like that. And trust me, Katie, it happens all the time. Marlene A has been everywhere, and B seems to have rowed with everybody. So, I'd just like to say you're not special, but of course you are.
She is special. Everyone from Buffalo is special. So.
Tell us about the Masters squad that you have at Asheville Rowing Club, Katie.
So right now we have a pretty significant sized team. We have enough for probably about 2 women's 8s, and then we're still working on building our men's 8 right now. We have a couple of, I would say they're specialized sculling groups that kind of hang out on the lake. And we've actually been really lucky. We've had some good coaches and stuff come through, but we're just a small group that likes to hang out on Lake Julian, and we do go to races and stuff. So they're an interesting group of people.
Masters always are. You never ever have a boring group of masters, in my opinion. Now, the reason we were really keen to get you on the show was people who are regular listeners will remember that we did a survey at the back end of 2021 called The State of Masters Rowing. And in it, there was an opportunity to tell us a little bit more or give us insight into your own particular situation. And Katie wrote such an interesting answer that we ended up in a bit of an email back and forth. And she is passionate about cox development. So if I understand correctly, there is a problem, which is that there is insufficient support for developing coxes, Katie. So what have you seen of that in your rowing life?
So even as a young coxswain, starting off in like the 8th grade and high school level, most of my coaches had never coxed before. They were kind of, you were thrown in and kind of shown how to steer, but you were given some commands to give to your crew, but you weren't really developed into your I'll call it a leadership style, to be able to kind of take your crew and kind of earn their trust and motivate them and stuff. And I went through the level 2 U.S. rowing coach certification, and there was very limited discussion about coxes in general. So it just became a kind of a soft spot with me that, if we're going to have this important role, that we should be developing the leadership skills of these individuals who really are like the coach inside the boat.
Totally agree with that. So identifying the problem's the first thing. Now, you're better placed than me. What do you think is some of the things that we can do that can develop coxes? And let's start our discussion around coaches. When you actually have a coach who is working with a crew, do you have ideas?
So I think every coach needs to minimally sit in that seat once, whether it's, in an 8 or in a 4. I know there's, that size qualification too, that you might be a little too big to sit, actually fit in the physical seat, but kind of just, be in that spot to learn the steering and, kind of learn the commands and everything. So it's kind of, I think coaches need to start with learning what the role does instead of just, allocating people to do it. And, there's you can't just jump in. It's not something that you can just jump in and be like, okay, here you go, and send somebody off, because, you're going to get hurt and danger and safety. And there's like so much you have to think about. And so I think I would start with, making sure that every coach actually kind of develops those skills themselves, like learns the steering and learns the commands that need to be given. And they can take their younger coxswains, or in my case, the older group that kind of jumps in and maybe gets injured and ends up having to sit out the actual rowing for a while. So we put them in as a cox, but kind of starting there and then moving forward into the more finessed skills of, can you keep your line and your point, and, are you able to do the technical corrections on skills, and can you race prep? And that probably comes later, but just basically, start with the basics, like learn how to steer the boat and learn how to, safely get it down to your dock, safely get it back into the boathouse. Start there.
Definitely start there. And regular listeners will remember that I got a rowing hat published on Row 2K this year, and that is called the coxswain seat plank. And it is literally a plank of wood across the gunnels, where we actually screwed a sculling seat into it. So there's a little bit of comfort to sit on, but it's perfect for the coxswain who is too large to fit in the available space. Your coach, for example.
Well, I think, Katy, you make such a good point too, because think about just an inexperienced person going into coxswain 8, an 8 going at a high speed, and all of a sudden you have to stop, or you have to turn, and you have to understand how to estimate these distances or deal with unexpected wind. I mean, I think the coxswain is so responsible for safety, is such a huge issue.
Yeah, safety is a big thing. I think a lot of rowers even take us for granted, but we're aware of everything going on. We're using peripheral vision. I'm looking around. I'm making sure I know what's going on behind me, in front of me, on all sides of me. There's a lot of technical things that go into it to keep everybody safe, and make sure that you all get the best workout in possible.
Katy, can we run back to working with a coach? Where you row, do your coaches typically go in speedboats?
We typically do not have a coach with us currently. Last season, we were lucky enough to have one of the youth coaches come over and coach for us, but we're typically a group that just kind of runs with it. I've been at other clubs that does go out with a coach launch, and they seem a little more apt to not letting the coxswains have a lot of freedom, because the coach really does most of the coaching. The coxswain is really just there to steer, keep point, make sure that you don't run into anything on the water. So I've had both experiences.
So I'd like you to talk us through what is your ideal relationship when you are working, you're in the boat, there's a coach in a speedboat. What is the ideal working relationship to get the best of both worlds?
So I think that, knowing what your coach expects of the crew, how to keep, will help you keep them motivated and keep them on track. If there's any one particular skill that they, individuals need to be working on, then I can have my technical eye watch for that person's blades specifically, like, oh, my 5 seat doesn't roll up early enough. I need to keep reminding them of that. Or, maybe my 3 seat, lays back too far, or, my 2 seat doesn't have enough body angle, stuff like that. I also think that the coach relationship with the coxswain is that we see things that the coach doesn't see inside the boat, and we hear different things than a coach would. We're a little more of an in-between. So I think some people might be afraid to approach the coach and be like, hey, I don't know that this really worked out, or this wasn't great. What do you think I should do? And then you kind of play the go-between. and be like, hey, I'm hearing this about the workout. Do you think we could maybe try something different? But I think there's a high level of trust between the coach and the coxswain, because I'll make changes to workout plans like mid practice and stuff, like, oh no, they really need to do the cut the cake drill because nobody's getting that body swing, or now everybody's got to row feet out, eyes closed. They are just not getting the hang of this, So you'll throw some stuff like that in. It might not be the coach's plan, but then afterwards you get that good feeling when the coach is like, oh yeah, that was a great call.
You were clearly in my crew the other morning. We did both those. So what I'd love, though, is if most of us, myself included, I am not a coxswain. I have coxed. I'm not a coxswain. How can anyone listening to us today help current and future coxswains develop, Katy?
And the main thing that I've found over the years is coxswains rarely get feedback. So, I mean, if you don't like something as a rower, please let us know. If you think we're a little too hard on the rudder, or like, hey, we were tipping to this side, were you on the rudder a lot? We just never seem to get that feedback from rowers or coaches. I know that there's probably not that technical development because not a lot of people are aware of all the things that we're taking care of inside of the boat. But, we need to hear like, oh yeah, that was a really good call. I liked it when you said that, or that really motivated me. So that would definitely help out, as if we got any sort of feedback.
So when you finish an outing, typically a workout, you've put the boat back on the rack. Do you all gather around and have a debrief?
Currently, no. With the restrictions that we have at the park, our current park, we're honestly off the water an hour before the park closes. That's the restriction that we have. So everybody just gets in, gets out, and moves on. And we typically either talk individually after the fact, but I have been at other clubs that you get off the water and everybody gets some sort of feedback, but typically your coxswain is still left out because either nobody knows how to give you feedback, or they don't want to like hurt your feelings or anything, like, oh man, when you said that was really terrible. Like, I think that's just one thing that maybe people aren't aware that we appreciate feedback as much as a rower does about their technical skill, even if it's just, oh, that didn't motivate me. So
that's really interesting about being frightened of hurting people's feelings. And I don't have a particular reflection on that, except to say at the back of my mind, I am always frightened of losing a coxswain. You guys are rare. You're like a diamond.
I think in our minds too, there's that little feeling of, oh, if I try something different, is it going to work? Or, so we're afraid, just as much as you might be afraid of hurting my feelings to tell me that something didn't work. I'm afraid to try something different because, either this has always worked or I haven't heard anything. So, yeah.
Tell us some of your tips for how do you draw feedback out from your master's crews that you work with?
Oh, I'm the one that sends the email, and then like, I'll ask directly. I'm like, hey, did y'all like it when I did this? Or was this motivational? Or do you think like this drill could have been executed better? Like, I just ask directly. I do try to ask as open-ended as possible, but I kind of invite my crews to give me feedback. I mean, and I don't, they know, like most of my crews that trust me enough will be like, yeah, when you said that was terrible. But, and I'm like, it's not going to hurt my feelings to hear that at all. I mean, I need to know. So, but I think I've also, when I was a youth coxswain, we kind of had these like no-name surveys that were created. So you didn't get these specific, like nobody had to tell it to your face, but we passed out little surveys for all the coxswains in a general manner and asked them to like rate us on our steering ability and our motivation and our calls and stuff. And that was a good system. I might go back to using that with some of the newer learn to row people who might not be as assimilated into the club as some of the older or more experienced or more they've been around for a longer time.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about what the differences are coxing masters compared with the other crews you've coxed in the past.
Oh, for sure. That's definitely a hot topic. I found with coxing masters, it's a little more finesse with your words, with your voice. They tend to prefer the non-screaming tactics. They're just
funny that. Yeah.
I typically coxed the youth boys crew who would, love to be sworn at, and they really like the grunting and the groaning and the harsher you were with them, the more you told them that they suck and whatever in the boat, the more motivated they would get. The masters crew, you kind of have to, be a little more tactful with your choice of words, but you can still use the inflections in your voice to like really be like, hey, this hard 10, I really need it. So that's a good way to do that, is to keep your to use your voice and kind of project what you want from them.
Marlene, have you got any questions for Katy?
Well, I was just thinking about how in coaching masters and coxing masters, how flexible the coxswain must have to be, because every time you go out, you may be working with a different lineup as
True.
well. So if you have a different lineup, or if you're rowing a mixed aid or mixed boats as well as men or women's boats, just the it's a whole different skill set, I think, to draw the best out of that crew, because you've got to perceive what that crew is like right away, because it may not be the same crew the crew you practice with on Monday may not be the same lineup you practice with on Wednesday. And, how do you kind of use some of your intuition to work, like to communicate with each boat? Because obviously if you have different skill levels, they're going to relate to different levels of communication, and kind of pulling those crews together in a cohesive way is not an easy thing to do on a really quick short notice. Like, this is your lineup, go.
Yeah, oh, that happens all the time, and then you changed it 5 times before you get there or whatever. But I think the main thing is, in a master's crew specifically, without having, a dedicated coach or whatever, just talking to the crew about what their goal for practice is before you get out there. And then realizing, like, we've got a lot of boats right now that are half people that are post learn to row and more experienced rowers. So just saying, like, hey, we're going to work on patience today, with the newer folks, and we're really going to develop their skill on this. So kind of giving your experienced crew members the expectation to allow you to help develop your more beginner or like novice crew members. I also think allowing the novices to have some sort of a say, even though they might not know what that say is kind of giving them the choice. Like, I always try to get them to buy in to the workout. So, I mean, with masters, I feel like you have to do that. Like, if they feel like they made this choice, then they're more likely to execute it than you telling them what to do. And that might just be adults in general, but
right.
I definitely think that that's something that, needs to be.
I think that's really true. It's a great insight into the difference between coaching adults and children, and more than that, in coaching adults where some are competitive and wanting to race and some of them are not. I think that pay it forward concept that you described, Katy, is a really essential part of a healthy, functioning masters rowing group.
Yes, and especially like you said, if you don't have time for the debrief afterwards, just because of the timing of when you get off the water in the practice, having that few minutes before practice, and kind of getting, like you said, if you've got a different crew all the time, getting everybody on the same page, especially when you read the lineup and say, oh, okay, well, we've got 2 people who are just out of learn to row integrating with 6 people who are relatively experienced, and kind of setting the stage for that, so that everybody has a good experience and it's not a frustrating experience for either skill level. Having to find your drills and your exercises that can integrate them, I think it takes a lot of insight, and masters crews are much more likely to be mixed in skill level. So
Yeah.
I think there's a bigger challenge there for the coxswain, because you're the coach in the boat on one level, and at the same time you're part of the crew,
Right.
which is a different role than being the coach, right? So
yeah. I also think it's hard to, at the master's level, like I coxed as a youth, but we've had coxswains come in at the master's level, and just not having that role, or not understanding what that role does. I think they appreciate it a little bit more when they have to kind of step into that. There's just they're a little more willing to do it because they understand how necessary it is to be out on the water. Whereas like the youth teams, you kind of always have a coxswain. It's part of the crew. That's, they recruit you for that specific role. But for masters, everyone that jumps in to learn to row, typically at most clubs that I've been at, has also learned to cox as well. There's kind of this just rotation through masters. I just really like it. I enjoy the adrenaline rush that you get from the racing, and, just being able to develop everyone else's skills,
do you have at your club, do you have any type of a system where each person rotates through coxing? Like one club I rode with in Florida, they just had a system set up that, they went down the lineup and they were just always rotating who rode, and then the next, you were in the bow seat, okay, now you cox the next practice, blah 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 blah, the next person who's in the bow seat, they cox the next practice. And it was just kind of, they just had a systematic way that everybody, once every 9 practices you would have your turn coxing.
Not currently. We have about 12 people that have gone through what I'll basically call our Learn to Cox program, where, they've gotten checked off on the coxing skills, and they will jump into like club practices occasionally. I was at one club where they would put up, I think it was on a doodle or something, and you could do like a half cox, half row practice. So the coach would switch you halfway so that you're still getting half of a workout. And then if we were just short on, what I'll call true coxswains, I guess, we would fill in with, the actual rowers to make up those positions. So
that's fun if you have a coxed quad. This touring quad I used to train with down in Florida, that's what we would do. We would 5 people, you had a coxswain, and everybody would rotate. Everybody would rotate through if you did a long row. So everybody would get a little break coxing, and everybody would row at the same time too. So that's a great way to do tours.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that works out really well because, you don't feel like you're slacking off on your workout, because that is something that as a youth coxswain, I always felt like I had to do other sports as well, because I never I never got the workout. So how was I going to stay in shape? Because even in erg practices and stuff, you're the one that's going around motivating them, making sure their splits are kept under. So the half cox, half row practices are, really more of my my speed at the master's level.
That's wonderful. Now, to our listeners, if you're listening and you've heard anything today, just one thing that has been useful or helpful for your own rowing, please consider supporting the podcast with a monthly donation. Go to fastermastersrowing.com/podcast, and subscriptions start at $1 a month. You choose how much you give. Now, when Katy and I were setting up this discussion, we both said we must mention Chelsea Domert's book, which is called Coaching the Coxswain. And this is a fantastic ebook. It's available on Amazon. And if you just search for the words Coaching the Coxswain, it has the most marvelous name, which is that it is a guide for the rowing coach who never coxed. And of course, that is precisely what Katy was explaining to us earlier, that it's really challenging. If you're coaching and you've never coxed, how can you be expected to give good instruction to your athletes? And in fact, in the opening sentences of the book, she writes, "Do not give this book to your coxswain." Although in fact, it actually is useful to give it to your coxswain in the end. But she explains exactly what you should be doing. So, Katy, what are your recollections of this book, and why was it useful for you?
Oh, well, the fact that it started off with the type of coxswains that you don't want, where it had like the yeller and the little quiet mousy one, and that kind of spoke to me, because I guess I always felt like I wondered where I fit in that. Like, how was I chosen to be a coxswain, and like, did I fit any of these categories before I really developed? But Chelsea goes through some great aspects of steering and mastering your docking and what to look for, and she definitely nails the racing portion, setting up your race plan, how to use your coxswain to set that race plan with the crew, the expectations of what a coach would expect from a coxswain. Also she's very good about acknowledging the fact that the coxswain does have a more personal relationship with the rowers than the coach does. So all of those aspects are, just speak out to me, having read the book, years after coxing myself. So
yeah, that's quite interesting, the reflection that I kind of wish I'd had this a little earlier in my career.
Right.
She also did a couple of follow-up books, which I will see if I can find where they are. But one was called Coaching the Coxswain on Tough Stuff, and the other was Coaching the Coxswain using their audio recordings. Have you ever recorded yourself, Katy, as your
do. Yes, I do all the time, actually. I have a Cox Orb Platinum that auto records all of my practice pieces out there. And so I download them, and I have a women's 4 that I've been working with for a few years now, and I'll send the recordings out to them too, to be like, hey, what do you think of this one? I thought this one was okay, but this one didn't, this one wasn't so hot. So, but that's another thing that I find too, is that there's very few coaches out there who like really listen to recordings and kind of give you feedback on that. So that might be another aspect, that if there were some coaches maybe that do cox a lot, or other coxswains, maybe that would be something that I think we could, as a rowing genre, we could develop more.
That's an excellent suggestion, and it's been such a long time since I've worked with a coach, in a boat for a coxed crew, because I tend to scull. That's just, I've completely forgotten that was really, really important. Any final words before we wrap up?
Well, I think this insight is so valuable, Katy, too. And I think coxswains for masters really need more support out there, for sure, because the skill set is, and as everything in masters rowing, the variety of the people, the personalities, the age groups. I mean, in an 8, you might have someone who's in their early 30s and somebody who's in their late 60s or early 70s, all in the same crew. And that's not something that happens in a scholastic program or usually a senior program. Everyone's approximately the same age. So, just talking and supporting coxswains out there about, these are this, the interpersonal skills that you need to develop and be aware of. I mean, it's like any good communication, but you're also dealing with steering, weather, running a workout, perceiving what's going on in the crew, thinking about, okay, well, what calls do I make to improve this practice if things are going a little bit haywire, right? How do you draw people together, and different skill sets? And, so what more could you deal with? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I could add just one more thing too about a coxswain is I think it's important for us to know how to row. Just so because we're in that boat, so we can help with that technical aspect. So, I mean, I don't just cox, I mean, I scull and I sweep as well, but I feel like everyone needs to learn every role in rowing, at least at the master's level. Maybe, your youth is very specific because you're almost always with a coach, but for groups that don't have that, just having everybody have that very, even just a broad knowledge of what each role does and is intended to do, that's super helpful to just improve everybody and keep, a really positive atmosphere.
I agree. And
Yeah.
I think that flows across into coxless boats as well. Everyone should learn how to stroke. Everyone should learn how to steer. Everyone should learn how to do the calls. They should be able to sit in, any seat in the boat, notwithstanding if you only row port, you obviously only get the port seats, but those are really, really important skills. And flexibility is the watchword for any master's program. You have to deal with what comes up, and there's an awful lot that comes up, as my week has shown me this week. So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness, and confidence in their rowing. You can become a student of the sport by buying a Faster Masters Rowing program subscription today at fastermastersrowing.com/join. Till next time, bye-bye.